delighted to welcome Karen Loomis back again. How many years is this that you've presented?
3, 4?
This must be at least the third, I would think. So every year the highlight of the summer school is us looking forward to an update on Karen's work as part of her PhD at the University of Edinburgh, studying the old Gaelic harps. So, over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much.
Bob is doing a miracle here, you know? He keeps saying, oh, there's another one.
Fine. Yeah, I just happen to have those, so bring them. Thank you for that excellent introduction. And I might add that, as Simon mentioned, I'm working on a PhD, studying the construction of the harps. And I started out as a student here at Skull 8 years ago, at Skull de Barshop, and that really established the foundation for what became my PhD study. So if it hadn't been for Skull de Barshop, this PhD probably wouldn't be happening right now. So thank you all very much. Right, okay, so today's talk is about the design of Irish harp, and discovering the design of an Irish harp. And some of you here have been playing these harps for many, many years, and some, this is your first week doing it. But you all have something in common, and that is that you're all playing instruments that are newly built, modern built, either replicas copied after one of the surviving historical instruments or based loosely modeled on the historical harps. So we're all playing, none of us are playing the historical instruments themselves because they are too fragile to be played. So we are relying on modern day buildings to produce something that sounds and behaves, we think, like the historical instruments did back in the day. And if you think about it, a musical instrument is itself a tool for making music. And how that instrument behaves and how it responds in the hands of the musician influences the choices that you make in the realization of a piece of music. Sometimes the influence is very subtle, and sometimes it can be a very large influence, and sometimes it can be a subconscious influence. But it definitely makes a difference. A nice analogy would be, you can think of it like a painter has a choice of paintbrushes to use. And even though the colors might be the same, the paint might be the same, even though the scheme of the picture might be the same, but if the painter is using a different set of paintbrushes, the brush strokes will be different, and it will have an effect on the painting that comes out in the end. And so the characteristics of your harp have an effect on the music that comes out in the end, and how you choose to make that music happen. Let me give you a for instance. Let's say you have a harp that maybe at the treble end of the compass it's a little bit weak or a little bit dull sounding, just a little bit. And you may find yourself subconsciously or even consciously compensating for that in the choices that you make with a piece of music that you are learning to play or working up for performance. And so little things like that can make a difference. Now, some of the people here may be very interested in recapturing the music as we think it may have been played back in the day, or trying to discover what that was and using the instrument as an avenue to discover that. And some people here are maybe more or less interested in that. At the end of the day, it's about making music. Either way is, that's a personal choice. Some of you are builders, maybe, of musical instruments yourself, and some of you are owners of musical instruments or potential purchasers of musical instruments after this week. For the builders, the things that I want to talk about today are things that I feel that I would like to see builders of replicas of these harps take on board. And for those of you who are musicians, players of these harps, these are things that, as someone who may either own one or potentially be buying one in the future, these are things that you yourself would want to be aware of. And if you are going to seek out a builder, you want to be an informed musician and know what you're getting. If the builder has made a harp that is different in some ways to the way we now understand the historical instruments were built, that may or may not be that doesn't necessarily mean that the harp they've built is better or worse, but it does mean it's different. And that's the key thing here. You want to be aware that you would be getting something that's different. You may be getting a wonderful musical instrument that makes you very happy, and that's perfectly all right. That's absolutely fine. Just be aware that it will be different, though. Now, what I've been doing for my PhD research is I've been studying, let's see if this works. Excellent, okay, this works. I've been studying two harps in particular, the Queen Mary and the Lamont harps, and they both belong to the National Museum of Scotland. So if you're ever in Edinburgh, you should go see them. They're both on display. They're on permanent display there. And these are both two of the earliest surviving harps of this type. They're two of the earliest surviving Irish harps. They both belonged to the same family for a number of generations prior to eventually coming into the National Museum of Scotland. The Queen Mary harp, which is the one on the left, this is Queen Mary harp, is similar to the Trinity College harp, the Trinity College Bar and O'Rourke harp that you may be seeing on Tuesday, those of you who go on the field trip, was, according to the family history of the Robertsons of Lude, who owned both of these harps historically, this harp is supposed to have been given to a member of the family by Mary Queen of Scots, and that's where it gets its name from. We don't know if that actually took place. It's part of the family history, but that's why it's called the Queen Mary harp, and that is purported to have taken place in 1563, so the end of the 16th century. We think this harp is older than that, so it was already possibly a quite old instrument by that time. The one on the right here, this is the Lamont harp, and Javier's concert that he just finished, he played a harp built after this, a replica of this harp. So that's what you just heard now. And according to the same family, according to the history of the same family, the Robertsons of Lude, the Lamont harp is supposedly was brought into the family as part of the dowry of a woman. It's assumed that it was Lilias Lamont, who married into the family that eventually became the Robertsons of Lude in the 15th century, and that this formed part of her dowry. We don't know, again, if this actually took place. It's part of the family history, but that's why it's called the Lamont harp. Now for this talk today, I'm going to start by talking about what has been done for this research project. So I'm going to go over that, and then I would like to talk about what it means. How do we interpret this, and what does it mean for our understanding of these harps, and what does it tell us? What can we learn about the intentions of the builders of these instruments? And that's the thing that I want you to take away from today, is it's not enough to just try to replicate the measurements to, the nearest millimeter or whatever. You want to, and you need to, really understand what was the builder trying to do? What was the builder's intention? That's key, that's very important. Okay, so for the research project, we had each of the harps, we took them out of the museum display and into the museum labs, and the National Museum of Scotland has an extensive conservation laboratory complex. It's actually quite a huge complex in the north end of Edinburgh, where they have the facilities to do examination and materials analysis of artifacts. So we did a visual examination of each harp, a photographic survey, which also included some macro photography, close-up photography of areas of interest. And that also helped us to flag up both the visual examination and the survey, not only recorded what's there, but also helped us to flag up areas of interest for further research. And we also did microscopic examination and also some microscopy, photography through a microscope. And we did materials analysis. And almost all of the analysis that we did was what we call non-destructive. What that means is we did not take samples off of the harps except in very, very specific circumstances, and it had to be really extraordinary circumstances where there was a compelling reason to do so. And when we did so, the samples were all micro samples. And it was a very limited number, and I think the largest was maybe 2 millimeters across. But the emphasis at all times was on doing our analysis without actually taking samples. It's what's called non-destructive analysis, so that we're preserving the instruments. And there are now really good techniques for doing so. We did what's called scanning electron microscopy, with energy dispersive spectroscopy, and that's a very big term, but basically it allows you to tell what elements make up the material without actually destroying material. We also used X-ray fluorescence, and that's doing some X-ray fluorescence right here on the Lamont harp, and that again allows you to see what elements make up the material that you're examining without actually sampling the material. It does no destruction to it at all. So it's very, very powerful analytical tools. So we did that. Initially we had a day and a half in the lab for each harp. We actually ended up taking them back into the lab a couple years later and doing 3 weeks, I think, of a very, very intensive follow-up lab work. But after our initial examination and analysis in the lab, we took the harps to be CT scanned. And here's the Queen Mary harp in the CT scanner at the Clinical Research Imaging Center in Edinburgh. And this is actually a research facility that's affiliated with the university. So this is strictly a research CT scanner, so it's not used for patients at the hospitals. It's strictly just for research. So in terms of ethics, there was no conflict with people who were sick, who needed to be CT scanned. So this is strictly for research, this facility. sure that the Lamont harp fits through the scanner. We actually, we measured it at a time. We did. We did measure it.
I know which side you took the samples of.
I have to say though, it's a good thing the Lamont harp isn't much bigger because it wouldn't have fit. You would not be able to fit much bigger harp through there. Okay, so okay, so what did we find with the CT scanning? First of all, I need to put this in. Good. Okay, first of all, let me explain what a CT scan is. Some of you may already know, and some of you may have had CT scans done or know someone who's had one done. Basically, what a CT scan is, it's essentially an X-ray, okay? But it is a three-dimensional X-ray that allows you to, on the computer, virtually to turn the X-ray around and look at it from all angles and do all sorts of other interesting things with it, which I will show you. So here are the two harps. I don't know if I should close this one. The sun's starting to come in. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Two better.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about the resolution of the X-ray scan?
Yes. Certainly. The resolution of this particular scanner is 0.5 millimeter. And there are multiple ways that you can use the CT scans and multiple ways of displaying the information, and you can get a lot of good data out of them. This is what's called volume rendering. It just shows you the whole object. You can see through the wood, but it's a nice way to pick up embedded metal objects. Things like pieces of fragments of nails, hidden repair work inside the wood. In fact, you'll see this, I'll show this in close-up in a little bit. There's a big spike that was hidden inside the Lamont harp that we didn't know was there, and it shows up really, really nicely on this. As I said, you can turn it around and look from all directions and all sides. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And here's the Lamont harp. And again, this particular display of the CT data emphasizes the embedded metal, but there are other ways of displaying to see other things that you might be interested in. One of the things that we discovered was there were 3 metal straps hidden inside the sound box of the Lamont harp that are part of an historical repair. You can take measurements anywhere inside or out on the surface of the object that you've scanned and get down to a resolution of 0.5 millimeter. And here, for example, is a slice through the neck of the Lamont harp. This is the Lamont harp, and I've just sliced it right through the middle. You can slice anywhere you want. And let's say, for example, right here, let's say I wanted to take measurements along this line here. I can do that, and here we are. And this picture on the right here is a slice right through here, but looking face on. So it's as if you were above the harp and looking down onto it. And you can take measurements wherever you'd like to. This is showing the neck joint with the sound box, which is something that you would not normally be able to see. And here you're able to take measurements inside the joint and also to see the repair work inside the joint and understand how it's put together. As I said, you can slice through the CT scan in any plane that you so desire, at any angle. And here, what I've done here is I've opened up virtually, I've removed the back of the Queen Mary harp. Now, at the time that I did this, I had asked the museum, just prior to doing the research project, I asked them if I would have permission to open up the sound boxes of the two harps inside. And initially they said no, they're too fragile. And, okay, fair enough. So I took the CT scans and I used the CT scan to virtually open up the sound box of the harp and look inside without actually opening it up. In fact, I did this after it was back on the harp was back on display. It was only out for the afternoon to be scanned, and then it was back in the museum on display. So I was able to go back weeks later and look inside. And if you look, it looks like there's ripples in here. I don't know if you can see them. The next picture, you can see them a little bit better. See these ripples? Those are actually tool marks on the surface of the wood. And in fact, it was this image that I convinced the museum to give me permission to open up the sound box. I said, look, there are some really interesting tool marks inside here. I think it would be worth looking inside from a research standpoint to investigate this further. So I did eventually get permission to open up the sound box of the Queen Mary harp and do visual inspection. And again, we used the CT scans to help us do this safely, because it turns out that the back cover of this harp is almost certainly original, in which case it might be the only surviving original back cover of the really old low-headed harps. I don't think, I'm certain that the back cover of the Lowland harp is not original. I know that's not original, it's much later, and I don't think the one on the Trinity is original. So in its incredibly delicate state too. It's very, very fragile. The wood is really full of wood-worn holes, and it's a bit compromised. So it's not a simple thing to remove this, and it's got little nails and stuff, and it looked like it was nailed in several places, and that's why the museum was really reluctant to remove it. When we looked at the CT scans, it turned out that none of those nails actually did anything. They had either rusted away or they went into empty space and actually didn't hold the two pieces together. And it turns out the only thing holding this on was 4 modern tiny brass screws that someone had put on it. So somebody did have the back off of this at some point in the modern era and put the screws in. And that allowed us to safely remove it. So we got to see inside, and there are the tool marks that we saw on the scan. And what was done here was, maybe I'll wait. Let me come back to this. But there's something incredibly interesting about these tool marks, and I'll come back to it. So keep the tool marks in mind. But it has those gouge marks. Basically, what the builder did was they took a gouge, which will scoop out a sort of semicircular, like a furrow, like a plowed field, and they very, very carefully and purposely went this way and then that way and this way and that way and this way and that way, working from the center to the sides through the entire length of the sound box, not on the sides. These have actually been scraped smooth with what I think is possibly what's called a toothing plane. And if anybody has done any building of musical instruments, you might be familiar with this. It's like a plane, only it's got a serrated edge. And it's really useful for working the wood in different directions. It doesn't tear up the wood. But this is not done the same way. And I think there's a reason for that. But let me show you what else we've done first, and I'll start talking about why it's interesting and important. Another useful thing about the CT scans is, as I mentioned earlier, you can see embedded metal inside the wood. Now, when we were examining the harps, the back cover of the Lama harp was loose. And in fact, there was one nail sticking in it, and it was a modern nail. relatively modern, and the conservator said, you know, that's gonna get snagged on something, because it had a broken end, and she said, you know, let's just pull that nail. It was the only nail holding it back up. So we ended up looking on the inside of the soundbox anyway, even though it wasn't playing. But it turned out to be a good thing, and one thing that my supervisor taught me was, anytime you're going to go look at a harp, because they said to me, you know, we were about to put the Lama back on display, and the museum called me up, and the curator said, you know, we're going to have to fix the back cover because it's loose, it feels like it's about to fall off, so we're going to be opening it up anyway, do you want to come over and see? And I said, yeah, right there. I'm going to grab my camera. But my supervisor said, whenever you're going to go look at a musical instrument, make sure you bring your torch, just in case. So I brought my torch, and I made sure, when I had my torch, I made sure I looked with my torch inside every single one of the string holes, because you never know. And it turns out there was a wire fragment inside one of the string holes. And here it is there. And I went back and looked on the scans, and sure enough, you could see it on the scans. Here's a close-up. And this turned out to be really critical to being able to study this fragment further, because when we first looked at it, all we could see was the end peeping out of this hole, and we couldn't tell how deeply embedded in the wood it was. And the head of artifacts conservation looked at that, and she's like, And I said, can we extract that so we can, you know, analyze it? She's like, no. Because there's already a crack here, and whatever you do with any artifact, including these musical instruments, is you don't do anything that's going to potentially cause damage. You want to be safe rather than sorry. So the museum was like, well, no, we don't know how deeply this is embedded in here. We don't want to start pulling and trying to extract it and cause damage to the wood. And me being me, I said, well, if you did extract it, could you pull it out without changing the shape? Because it could be part of the toggle knot. And I really would like to see the shape, and whatever. But then I went into the scans, and I could see the shape, and I could see this is the wood here, this is the string band here. The darker area is the string hole, and here's the wire, and you could actually see they're just stuck in the wood. And we used the scans to see how we could extract this. It's just like a surgeon, you know, uses a CT scan to see what, you know, some part of your body that needs to be stitched up or something or pulled out. Or like a dentist taking an x-ray before extracting a tooth. It's the same idea. And I did a little surface rendering in 3D. There's that's the wire fragment there. The big thing above it is the string band. And so we could actually turn that around and see it. I don't know if I can do that again. I'm not sure. It's going to go crazy. It's going to go crazy. Let's see if I go back. Let me go back. Okay, we'll make it do it again. So there's the fragment sitting underneath the string band. So I made it so the wood's invisible in this. You can't see the wood. All you can see is the metal. And so you can turn it around and actually see its shape without taking it out of the heart. It was pretty cool. But we were, so the head of conservation, who has the hands of a surgeon, literally was able to extract this without bending it, which was really brilliant. And there it is there. I've just got two pictures of it just from different angles so you can see the shape a little bit better. But I was able to analyze the shape, and it looks like there was at one point a toggle, a thin toggle, like a couple millimeters in diameter, so probably a metal toggle, not wood. A wooden toggle that thin would just break and be like a toothpick. But a metal toggle would work there. And it looks like it was probably wrapped around, and the toggle would be right there. We were able to then do analysis of this wire fragment and find out what it's made of, which is incredibly important. This is only this the second one from one of these early harps to be analyzed, to be discovered and analyzed. So Bob Evans found one a number of years ago on the Ballandary harp fragments, which are in the National Museum of Ireland. He found a little tiny piece of brass wire, and that was analyzed. It was attached to one of the tuning pins. So now we have a second one, and this has been fully analyzed. And not only do we now have sort of a recipe for a wire that we know is in one of these harps, and also the diameter, which is really helpful, but you can learn something about this particular owl. This is a brass, by the way. You can learn something about it just by looking at the trace elements, not just the copper and zinc. I don't want to get too deep into that right now because that's a whole nother talk. Although you can't definitively date the copper alloy based on the composition because there was a lot of variability. But some compositions were more typical during a particular time period than others, and that is helpful. And it turns out that this one is typical of the first half of the 17th century. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that this was definitely from that time period, but this is certainly consistent with that time period, and that's interesting. And that's by looking at the trace elements, not just the two major ones. And we did analysis of other metal parts on the harps, tuning pins, and some of the repair work, and some of the decorative work. And I've been looking at the composition of those and seeing how they fit in with what we know about historical brasses, when actually quite a bit is known. Okay, so what have we learned, and what does it tell us about how these harps were built, what the builders were trying to do with these instruments? I mentioned that we were able to take measurements anywhere we wanted to. One of the things that I did was I took measurements of the soundboards of each harp and did a contour map of the thickness of the soundboard. This is the first time this has been done for any of these old harps. Before, we just didn't know. And that's probably an important thing to point out is that up until this project, this is not about knocking what modern day builders of replica harps have been doing, because we just didn't know. The information wasn't out there. And so builders have had to, up to this point, kind of, fill in the blanks on their own and try to guess what was inside without being able to see inside. So this is the first time we've had this information. And what this shows is how thick the soundboard is, and the bluer colors mean thinner, and the sort of redder colors are thicker. Here's the string band. And it's thinner up at the treble end than it is at the bass end. Okay? And that, I can tell you from examining the inside of the sound box, that is part of the original construction. That wasn't done later. Okay? It was built this way originally. The Lamont harp is the same way. A little bit less obvious, but it's the same way. Also, they're both thicker on one side. They're both thicker on the left-hand side. Let me go back to the Queen Mary again.
I have a question with your
Yeah.
color scale.
Yeah.
Is it the same scale or is it relevant to each other? Or
They're
like the blue-
identical. They're the same scale. They're on the same scale. So, okay, why am I pointing this out, and why is this interesting? If you make the soundboard thinner in the treble, that helps the soundboard, or I should say the front of the sound box. It's actually not a separate board, but it's the front face of the sound box. That allows it to vibrate more freely. It makes it less stiff. If you were to make the sound board, the front face of the sound box, the same thickness all the way up from bass to treble, this end would be stiffer than this end, just because it's narrower up here. It's like if you had imagine if you had a stick, okay, and it was a certain thickness. If it was a really long stick, it's easy to bend. But if you had a stick that was exactly the same thickness but a lot shorter, it would be really hard to bend. Okay, it's the same principle going on here. So if you were to carve out a sound box and just have it the same thickness all the way from bass to treble, the treble end is going to be stiffer than the bass end, and it's not going to be as free to vibrate. And you may find that the treble end of the harp is a little bit quieter than the bass end. It's less responsive. So this is something that the builders of these instruments were aware of and built into the instrument. Certainly the Queen Mary harp is definitely original. And it's something that other harps today, say for example pedal harps, they do this. They have tapered soundboards in the front. And it's for that reason. Both of these, what I found from examining both of these harps is that they are very cleverly built, and they incorporate things, design features, I guess you could call it, that up to this point builders today have not been aware of, and so for the most part have not been incorporated into instruments. And that's something that makes it a little bit different. I mentioned earlier, you know, if it's built differently, it's going to behave differently. And so here's the first example of that. This is something that I would like to see people take on board. Make it, you know, make the soundboard not all the same thickness, because we now know that it wasn't like that. It's going to affect the sound. Something else that we discovered, here's the Queen Mary harp, and here's the four-pillar. And if you take a cross section through the four-pillar, you can see the wood grain. You see that? Do you see the growth rings of the wood? Here's the center. It's actually a piece. It's actually a branch, a piece of round wood. So that was a branch. There's the center of the branch right there. And not only that, the wood grain follows the curve. Do you see the wood grain there? It follows the curve of the four-pillar. This is really important. This is a very, very important design feature of these harps. And this is one that I would like to see people take on board as well. If you make a curved four-pillar with the grain following the curve, it is going to be, there's two things that are going to happen. It's going to be stronger than the same four-pillar would be if it was made out of just cut out of a straight grain piece of wood and just cut to shape. It's going to be stronger. This one is going to be stronger, okay, because you don't have any end grain. It's also going to be more flexible. And that, again, affects the sound of the instrument in a subtle way. And I don't know if Paul Dooley mentioned this at all in his talk earlier this week. He mentioned this in his Galpin Society Journal article on the Trinity College harp. And it's his feeling that these four pillars are meant to be flexible, and I quite agree with him on this. If the four pillars really stiff, that's going to inhibit the vibration of the sound box and the bass a little bit. If the four pillar has a little bit of springiness to it, imagine it kind of a little bit like a spring, that's going to help the harp be a little bit more flexible at the bass end. Because if the four pillar has some give, it's not trying to vibrate against a really stiff object. It's got a little bit of give there. So the key here is flexible as well as stronger. This is not an accident, by the way. This is not always just happens to be this, whoever made this harp, because the Lamont harp is the same way. At least for the upper section, the bottom part of the four-pillar on the Lamont harp is a replacement, it's a repair, and that has just straight, the wood grain just is straight. But if you look at the top part, it follows the curve. And this is something that builders today want to take into consideration. It's going to affect the strength and the flexibility of the instrument. And if you make it more flexible, not only does it help the sounds, this is a mechanical and an acoustical system together. But if it's more flexible, it's going to have more give. And for example, when I was flying over here from Scotland, it was a little bit rough, and if you've ever flown through turbulence, you look out the window, you see the wings of the plane doing this, right? But they're supposed to do that, okay? They're supposed to do that, because if they were rigid, they would probably snap off, okay? Flexible is good. Flexible keeps things from breaking. It's better to flex, it's like the willow tree bends, but it doesn't break. So you might be getting the idea that there's a theme here. Okay, the theme is flexible. That's what these harps are. If you take away nothing else from this talk, the most important thing for you to take away from this talk is that these harps were meant to be flexible. They are musical instruments. They're not coffee tables. They were designed to be flexible. Okay, that's really, really important to incorporate that into the instrument. I use the CT scans to look into the joinery, and so here's the Queen Mary harp, and here's where this is the neck of the harp, this is the sound box, this is where they join together. And you can see, actually, normally you wouldn't be able to see this. You can see where they join together, and let me go down so we can see the whole thing. There we go, here's the whole thing. Okay, here's the inside of the sound box. This is empty space inside here. And here's where the neck joins with it. This is a tenon. The sticky up part is the tenon. And the hole that it goes into is the mortise. And it's just open. It opens up all the way to the inside of the sound box. Now, this is something that only a few builders today have been doing, or had been doing up to this point. Mostly because people weren't aware that that's the way these were made. This is really very, very important. By having this open, you've got less wood here in the treble end, and it allows the treble end of the sound box to be more flexible, and it allows the neck in this joint more freedom of movement, because the harp is strung on one side of the neck, and so under the tension of the strings, the neck is always going to want to pull over to the side. And again, flex instead of breaking. We want it to flex but not break. And by allowing this joint to be more flexible, the neck can turn a little bit without breaking off the tenon or causing damage further down. And I know that people have been a little bit reluctant, or some people that I've talked to, some builders that I've talked to have been a little bit reluctant to build this way because it looks like, well, is it going to break? We look at the old harps and they're covered with repairs. They're all, the Lamont harp is a mess, And it's like, well, you think, oh, well, if we build our harps that way, they're going to break too. I don't want to build something that's going to break. That's the golden rule of an instrument builder. Is you don't build a musical instrument that's going to break because your customer is going to come back with it and say, fix it. And then you have to fix it. So nobody wants to build something that's going to break, but actually it turns out that much of the damage that you see on these harps, particularly these two, is actually the result of people later on doing repairs that took away the flexibility of the instrument. For example, on the Queen Mary harp, there's a big iron strap right across the joint here. That's what this bright thing is. And it's like wearing a neck brace. It can't move anymore. And so what happened was the end of the neck down here cracked because the strings were still trying to pull it over, but it wasn't able to turn, so it broke down here. Well, why did they have to put this on here in the first place then? Well, it looks like that there's growing evidence, and I'm fairly well convinced that these harps were, both of them, at some point in their lives, the tension of the strings was increased beyond what they were originally designed to take. Okay, at some point, these harps were used for a long period of time. More than a centuries. And it's really easy to swap out strings. And at some point, it was decided thicker strings, whatever, more tension. Different string was put on that increased the tension. And I think that this was the case not just with these two harps, but in general for these old low-headed Irish harps. And I suspect that this took place sometime in the late 16th century into the early 17th century. But for some reason, the style of the day was to increase the tension on these instruments. And the newer instruments were built to take it, but the older instruments were retrofitted with straps across this joint, whatever, and they put on higher tension strings, cranked them up, and stuff started to break. Or the joinery started to pull out because it's made to, it's made to be flexible. You start squishing the four pillar, and like a seesaw, this end goes down and this end goes up. So it starts to pull out of the joint, and somebody says, "Oh, it's coming apart. We've got to put something across there to keep it from coming apart." They do that, and all of a sudden they've got a problem down here. They've just kicked the problem down the road. So I don't want people to be afraid to try these design features, because you have to understand that these design features of these harps were developed probably over a very long period of time. And they were made so that they worked for the instruments as built. So don't be afraid. I think a lot of the damage that we see, first of all, there's insect damage, but that's a separate thing, but a lot of damage we see, I think, is from increased strength tension. Lamont harp, same thing. This joint here, it's open. There's no wood in here. There's air. We want air. Okay, let me breathe. And it's made to be more flexible. There is a difference between these two, though, and that's really interesting. Here's Queen Mary again. It doesn't look like the Lamont. They're same idea, but done differently, and the difference is really important. Okay, as I said earlier, both of these harps have design features that, modern day builders of replicas hadn't been putting in harps built today because they didn't know they were there, so don't blame them. And they're clever things that make a difference. The Queen Mary harp, of these two harps, it's the cleverer, okay? Of the two harps, the Queen Mary harp is the more sophisticated in terms of the way it's built. And it's incredibly clever, the way it's done. It is incredibly clever, sophisticated instrument. I know I'm really spending a lot of time on this joint, but this joint is important if you're a builder, or if you're not a builder, if you're just somebody who wants to buy one of these harps someday or use one. Be aware, ask the builder, how are you doing this joint? Because it makes a huge difference to this instrument. This is like the heart of the instrument. In the Queen Mary harp, it's at an angle. See how it's angled here? I've got these big arrows here. I'll explain those in a second. On the Queen Mary harp, it sits at an angle to the sound box, like that. On a Lama harp, it's in line with the long axis of the sound box. This is bad. Okay, big X. This is good. The reason this is so good and so clever is because what these arrows represent is the direction of the force due to the strings. These strings up here are kind of splayed out in this direction, but most of the strings farther down here, where they're going to have the most effect, are at this angle. Okay, and assuming that the four-pillar is intact and the four-pillar is holding up the other end of the neck against the tension of the strings. The string's trying to close this whole thing like a big bear trap, but the four-pillar is holding it up at the other end. This end is now being pulled up against the sound box by the tension of the strings. There's a lot of tension on those strings. And the direction that it's being pulled pulls it right up against this flat surface here. So you've got a nice big surface to spread all that force over. And furthermore, the hole here, the mortise, the socket that the tenon fits into, is at that same angle. So if this were to start to pull out, let's say the four-pillar starts to bend under the tension of the string, because the four-pillar is a little bit springy, so it's supposed to bend down a little bit. That means this end is going to come up like a seesaw, but that's okay because it's going to come up in this, it's going to move in this direction, so it's just going to slide up out of that joint a little bit. But look over here. The force is in the same direction, but here, instead of being nice, having this nice big surface to press against, it's not flat against the surface, okay? It's at an angle, and that's not good, especially down here. Look what's happening down here. It's pushing out against the back of the sound box. It's pushing that out. And furthermore, as the four-pillar bends down and the back of the neck goes up, this is going to swing out, and it's going to push the back of the sound box out and crack it. And that is exactly what happened to this harp. This harp has a metal band right here, almost like a hose clamp. And that's because it cracked. And my replica of the Lama harp, which has the same joint just like this, it did exactly the same thing. It has a metal band around it because of that. So if you're going to do this kind of an open, what's called a through mortise, if you're a builder or if you're a buyer, make sure it's done like this one. If it's done like this one, it's going to crack, and it's going to need to be repaired. So this is incredibly cleverly done. This is done so that it's flexible. It allows the treble end of the harp to speak well, adding in that flexibility. It allows the neck the freedom of movement that it needs as the whole instrument flexes. And it's strong. It's not going to break. This is not going to break unless you do something to the instrument, like putting on way too much tension. At some point, it is going to break. And if you put too much tension, it's going to break. But under normal use, it's not going to break. This is going to break. So whoever did this, or the construction tradition behind this harp is incredibly, incredibly clever. And it's something that we can learn a lot from. And we can see what happened to the Lama harp. This is a close-up of the damage to the neck. That's why there's that big spike in here. What happened was the sound box cracked, so this band was put around it like a hose clamp. But still, so now the neck can't move. It's like it's got a neck brace on. It can't move, it can't turn. So you've got the potential for more damage down here. And that certainly contributed to this big crack, and that was a contributing factor. So here's what the lemma looks like now. You can see. It wasn't like that when it was built, okay? It was straight when it was built. And it's got the four pillars broken. What's that? Yeah, so this is the result of extreme tension on the instrument. And one of the things that people really wanted to come out of this research is you know, there are a few questions people want. They want to know, how old are they? What are they made of? What are the measurements? And what are the original string lengths? Especially for the lining part, which is hard. So I had to go and look at all the different motions. Like it twists, it does this, it pulls out, this joint pulls out. Okay, so this pulls out here, this turns this way, it rotated that way, it went back that way, and also the belly came up, was pulled up from the tension of the strings. I went and I tried to figure out what the original string lengths are, which I did, and I did it analytically. What I did was I went in into the scans and I measured in 3 dimensions the point where the string leaves the tuning pin and the point where it contacts each string shoe. And then using geometry and trigonometry, I went in and I removed all of the twists and turns and made a straight frame to see what the string was. But part of that, as I mentioned, was the belly rises due to the tension of the strings. Do we know if it was flat when it was new? What if it was carved with an arch like that? Which is something that, who knows? People say maybe it was carved that way, or partly that way. Actually, you can tell. Okay, so what this picture is, I went in also to the CT scanners, and I did a cross section through the sound box. So this is the front of the sound box. This is a string hole. Okay, so you're looking crosswise. This is a string hole. This is outside the heart. This is inside the heart. Notice that the sides of the hole are straight here. This is almost at the end, number 31. So all the way at the base end of the heart with 32. This is the second one to last. And this is where the front of the sound box doesn't have a belly much. It's pretty much flat there. And you can see it's pretty flat there. There's the string band. The little 2 black dots are part of the string shoe. They're metal, that's why they're short. Here's another hole. This is actually starting to come up onto the belly. And the sides aren't straight. And I remember looking at that and thinking, gee, it looks like a drawbridge. You know how when a drawbridge opens up? You look at the edge of the road and it's like this. It's like, that looks like a drawbridge. So what if I turn the sides down? So I just digitally scooted the sides down so that it was flat and looked at the sides, and sure enough, they're straight again. Now, if the sound box had been made originally with a carved out arch, then you carve out the sound box and then you put in this bore in the string holes and you're done. If it had been carved with that belly in it, or with any belly in it, then once you take the sides down, like in Photoshop or whatever, what would happen is the sides of the hole wouldn't be parallel. They would be angled in, okay? And that would tell you it had a belly beneath it. And this didn't. This heart was carved flat when it was new. The belly that the Lionel harp has is entirely due to the tension of the strings. It did not have a belly in it. That's definitely. Yes, the other thing with the Lionel harp. Okay, so you say, we want to know the string lengths. Well, the Lionel harp is complicated because there are. All right. Well, right now there are 32 places for tuning pins in the neck and 32 holes in the sound box, which sounds fine, but one of the tuning pins in the neck is obviously an addition. So that means there's 31 in the string band, but there's 32 string holes in the sound box, and there wasn't one added to the sound box. Definitely originally had to be 2. So the numbers don't match. It's what happened here. And up until I started to look at this, the prevailing theory was, well, the neck used to be longer and either broke or was shortened, and we lost the pole off the end, and so they had to put it down here. And that made a whole lot of sense because this nice decorated end cap on the end of the neck, it's got a piece cut out of the bottom bent back to make it fit because the sleeve is too long. So it looked like, yeah, it was, that was made short, it made perfect sense, only that's not what was done. I was able to look in here, and that was never, the cheek bands were never shortened. And, so you can see inside here, where the finishes. So we could see the ends of the cheek bands, and they were not shortened. And I also looked visually, I could see inside,
Excuse me, how do you know they're not shortened?
I-
Obviously, can you?
okay. If they had been shortened, here's where the 32nd string hole would have been. Now this one you can't tell because it's right off the edge. So there could have been one here. But on this side, the right-hand side cheek band, you would see a little cutout there. But what's even more compelling is if you look at the wood. Okay, so let me explain what these pictures are. This is just looking at the metal. This is from the CT scan. So we're just seeing, actually looking underneath the end cap. Here's the end cap here. We can't remove that. It's nailed on, and it's too delicate to remove. So we can't actually look visually. So we have to use the X-rays. Here's the end cap. Here's looking from above. So imagine if you're standing above the neck, and you did a slice horizontally through the end of the neck. Here's the end cap. The white lines here are the holes for the tuning pins, and the dark is cheek band, and the gray, or the dark gray here is wood. The light gray is empty space where the tuning pins go. Okay, so we're looking down onto where the tuning pins go. They would go across. Here's two tuning pins here that were not removed. So we're looking down onto the tuning pins. And so you see two tuning pins, there's only space here, and then we come to, this is number 31 here. And then here's a big piece of wood here on the end. There is, if there was a 32nd one, it would be right here, and it's not there. There's just wood there. And furthermore, when I looked, I can actually see a little piece of the cheek band through this hole here that's cut in the end cap, and you can actually see there's a straight line there, because there's a decorative edge incised in the cheek band, and there's little almost like eye-shaped incised lines around each of the tuning pin holes, and then there's a straight one right next to this one, like this is the end. But this is really quite compelling. It would have been right here, and it's not here. There's a big piece of wood here. So there wasn't. Even though it was a good theory, and it made perfect sense, but it's not what was done. So there never was a 32nd tuning pin there. Okay, so what's going on? All right, this is what the Lamont harp looks like now. And this is just an outline. And so here's how it was almost certainly, or most likely, strung up. So we've got 32 string holes in the sound box. Now, late in its working life, after there were breaks and repairs, this is probably how it ended up being strung up. What happened to this harp is a big crack opened up in the neck, and it actually destroyed the top two tuning pin holes. First, the very top one, and then later, as the crack spread, the second one. So what this picture is showing is right after the top one became no longer usable, and before the second one became no longer usable. And what probably happened, I'm working backwards in time, starting from the end of this harp's working life, is they were no longer able to use these top two. And so you add one at the bottom, and it goes into this hole, number 31, not this one. This was never used. I checked. This was not used. I don't know why it's there, but it wasn't used. So what they did was, instead of stringing from hole number 1 to tuning pin number 1, they strung from hole number 1 to tuning pin number 2, and hole number 2 to tuning pin number 3. They offset it by 1. So then you get down to hole number 31 to tuning pin number 32. you have to add that extra one. And this will make a little bit more sense when we see what it looked like originally. Okay, so this is what the harp was like originally. This is the straightened frame, and this is just a diagram, but the dots here are these are plotted from the coordinates that I figured out from analytically straightening the frame, and I drew this around it. And I straightened this out too. It turns out that the foot of the harp, right now, it's bent backwards. Let me see if I can go. Okay, back up. See how this looks like it follows the curve of the belly? And it was not carved this way. This was bent this way by the strings pulling up and the four pillar pushing down. You can't see it on this outline, but the wood grain follows this direction, and actually the inside wall is tilted back too. So the whole foot of the harp got bent backwards. It wasn't carved with this arch. It was completely bent. And the amount that it was bent is equal to the amount that this rotated forward. Okay, so originally it looks like, and this is one solution, but it certainly makes sense. You've got just straight string hole 1 to pin 1, all the way down to string hole number 31 to pin number 31. And we don't need this, and this wasn't used. There's no evidence that it was used. The others were all had evidence that they were used. And you lose the top 2 tuning pin holes. First this one and then this one. And so you shift it down. Something very clever happens. And I don't know if this was on purpose or they just got lucky, but look at the angle of the strings. It hardly changes. What has happened is you almost don't notice it. And actually, all the strings have been shifted down one. Because what has happened is the neck has pushed back. So the back of the sound box are pushed. The whole neck is shifted back this way. And if you didn't shift the string down by 1 tuning pin, the strings would be angled back more. And it would change this, it would narrow the string spacing, and the strings would be raped over at a lower angle, which might make it a little bit more awkward for the player to play the harp. But by doing this, by offsetting the string this way, they came up with a really clever solution that, whether they intended it to be that way or not, but it works. You keep the same angle. I just thought this was really, really clever. And you maintain the strings, and it also helps with the string length, because the harp, as the neck pushes down, it shortens the strings. But by shifting the strings forward, you regain some of that. So it was a very clever solution to major damage to the harp. And here's what it looks like with the flat belly. The Queen Mary harp, I did, similar thing. The motions were a bit different because the joinery is constructed a little bit differently. But what about the belly? Now, I mentioned the problem with the strap on the neck causing damage farther down, and this is where it shows. And this patch here is to patch a break in the cheek band. The cheek band actually snapped due to the neck turning to left. The whole end of the neck, it's almost like if you had a broken wrist. The whole end of the neck did this and went to the left. So then we'll move that. And you can see from both sides there. Also a lot of better than that. Here's what it looks like from above. So if you look, here are the tuning pins. I just drew these lines on here so you can see they're all lined up here, all lined up here. Here's where the break is, and all of a sudden, it's interesting because when you look at the Queen Mary harp, it doesn't look like it's particularly badly broken, but actually on the inside it is. And when I was doing, when I was figuring out the straightened frames for these harps, the neck of the Queen Mary harp is really quite twisty. It's much more twisty than the the llama harp in a way, even though the llama harp neck looks a lot worse because it's got a big crack in it, but the cheek bands are really thick, and so the cheek band is not twisted, but the cheek bands on the Queen Mary harp are actually twisted. So I did correct her. What about the belly? Okay, this is where the story gets kind of interesting. So I tried the same thing. Here's a string hole at the end of the Queen Mary harp. The Queen Mary harp, there are these wooden pegs in there, and I'm kind of wishing I had taken them out before we CT scanned it because they're not historical and they make it hard to see the string holes. But I'm pretty sure that's straight. And this is straight here. Here's where there's no belly. So this is at the base end where there's no belly. Here's a cross section of the string hole where there's a belly. And if you put the side, you can just sort of digitally flatten the front of the sound box for this string hole. This goes in, and this is not parallel. Look at the top of the string band. This is now flat, but there's no way that it was constructed this way. The sound box of the Queen Mary harp appears to have been carved with a belly. Now the belly that it has now is not completely carved. It did pull up, and you can see that. As Simon may have pointed out, I don't know if he's talked to you about this year, but he has pointed out in the past. If you look at the sides of these harps, and you can see it on the Trinity harp, the sides of the sound box are sucked in, and that's, as Simon has pointed out, is from the strings pulling up the front of the sound box. As you pull up the front, the side pulls in. And you see that on the Queen Mary harp. But it doesn't look like it was carved entirely flat. It looks like it started out with some belly and then it pulled up more.
Is it possible to estimate how much would carve?
I've tried to, it's really, really difficult. I'll have to come up with a different method to figure that out. I can only say that it was, it had some belly, but I haven't been able to estimate how much yet. I may be able to, by looking at things like the, where it's at when the top of the string band is flat. Because if you look here, see that's flat, and this isn't. It's in, so it's too far down.
But it was carved in the middle, not in the base, at the base. Yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I may be able to tell, exactly where the belly was carved and how much, but it'll take a little bit more careful work. But that, I was not expecting that, okay? That's really, really interesting. And I'll have to go back and make sure that this is really the case, because it's not what I was expecting at all. But it certainly, right now, that's what it looks like. It looks like, in addition to pulling up and adding to, the belly, that the Queen Mary sound box was not originally flat when it was carved. With figuring out the number of strings and the stringing for the Queen Mary harp was not so complicated. If you've seen Simon's harp, he's got a metal loop at the end. The Queen Mary harp was originally made for 29 strings, and a extra tuning pin hole was put into the neck, and then a little metal loop was put in the bottom for an additional string. Was just showing it here. I like this picture because you can also see the drainer too, a little overlay. So here's a photograph of the harp, and then a slice from the CT scan. Okay, so here's what the Queen Mary harp looks like now, and I did pretty much the same thing I did for the llama harp. And that's what it looked like, I think, originally. Over 29 strings. I also did, this is if it had a flat sound box originally. I'm pretty sure it didn't. I did the picture anyway. Yeah, so the Queen Mary harp is interesting. It's one other thing I wasn't going to talk about this too much, and I don't want to go into it too far, but in analyzing the string lengths of the Queen Mary harp, it also looks like it was designed to have stronger strings in the treble, in the extreme treble end, these strings are proportionately too long, even for the harp as it is now. They're proportionately a little bit long, and even if it had, whether or not it had a belly, and the Lama harp isn't like that. So these are proportionately long compared to the other ones.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, in order to, let's say you had the same string all the way up. Let's say, you have brass string from, the middle of the harp all the way to the treble end, same kind of brass, okay? These strings up here in the extreme treble, you can only pitch a string so high before it's going to snap, right? So you pitch them up as high as you can before they snap. But these strings are much under tension, more than you'd expect. I mean, yes, you get under tension strings down here for these harps in general, but even more than you'd expect. Yeah. Yes.
Considering the flexibility required, as you were saying, the four-pillar and the neck, and the variability of the thickness of the wood in the sound box, does that affect in any way the string itself and the bass notes and the belief that in order to achieve the best quality sound, they should be strung of gold?
That's a good question. I think quite possibly. I haven't really thought about that yet, but I think quite possibly. Yeah. Yeah, that's something that needs to be studied some more. So I think, yeah, quite possibly. I don't know the answer. I have one last thing. All right, here's my acknowledgements, but I have fun stuff now. So as a reward for sitting here, oh, wait. Touch it. Okay, so I brought 3D glasses. Yay, 3D glasses. Okay, so take one and pass them around. What I'd like you to take away from this today, though, is that, as I said earlier, it's strength and flexibility. Don't be afraid to make the harps flexible. They're meant to be flexible. They're not meant to be rigid. I think that's something that the next generation of replicas could really benefit from. I think builders have been cautious up to now, and understandably so. Like I said, nobody wants to make an instrument great. But now that we've seen how the original harps were built and are beginning to understand the reasoning behind the choices and the way that they were built, we can start to be a little bit braver about the replicas that are made. So yes, flexibility, that is the thing. Strength and flexibility. Okay, so well, let me back up. Sorry, I didn't wait until I heard that. Also, I have an ulterior motive for showing you these.
The glassy photo.
What's that?
The photo of everybody.
Oh, no. No photos of everybody. I promise. Does anyone have any, while we're waiting for those to go around, does anyone have any more questions?
Yep.
Yeah. Hit it.
Do we know what was the gauge of the string fragment? And
Oh, yes, thank you.
what
Yeah.
string hole was it sitting in?
Yes, it was 0.69 millimeters, so basically 0.7 millimeters, and it was in string hole number 14. Oh, yes, and of course I had notes, and I didn't look at my notes, because I wanted to say something. Thank you for asking that, because, so, yeah, I was able to, when I worked out the string and some solutions for the string scaling for the Lamont card, since we had that fragment in there, I was able to say, oh, okay, so what would the tension have been for that fragment? And, because there are concerns about damage, the Lamont harp is pretty broken, you have to replicate that. So for that string with that gauge, and in the location that that it's in. Of course, it depends on how the harp is tuned, but for one of the solutions that I think is pretty plausible, you end up for that string with a tension, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw a number out, but I'll explain. You end up with a tension between about 23 and 26 kilogram force. Now, to put that into context,
It's pretty high, isn't it?
yes, so the student Lamont harps have, for the comparable string, have half that. Half, okay? The student Trinity, for the comparable string, sort of roughly comparable string, has less than half that, has 10.6, less than half. The student Lamont has 12.6, almost exactly half. So when I say, yeah, the tension was increased, yeah, so I'm pretty sure this string is from the 17th century, that fragment, and probably the first half of the 17th century. And so that really is in line with, when I say they probably increased the tension, I mean they really cranked up the tension on this instrument. It's no wonder the Lamont harp looks the way it does. Can you imagine, that's just one string, can you imagine doubling the tension on a student Lamont? What would happen? It would look like that, you know. That's why the harp looks the way it does. So yeah, so this is where, you know, it's great to be, you know, I wouldn't have been able to do that unless I had the analysis of that string.
Karen,
Yeah.
can I quickly ask?
Yeah.
Bob Evans used thicker strings that we use nowadays, so how does it compare to how your harp used to be strung?
Yeah, my harp, that's a good question. So my Lamont replica, originally had much thicker strings, and I don't think I copied the numbers down right now. I've backed off on the tension on my harp, so it's similar to like what I quoted for the student Lamont. But it was originally, I figured it out, I think it was about 20. So it was very
More
close.
comparable, yeah.
Yes, it was very, very close to.
And what were there problems with that? What were the problems?
Like I mentioned, my Lamont replica has a metal band around the top of the sound box because the sound box cracked up at that neck joint that I was pointing out. And the neck on mine is pulled over. It's behaved very similarly to the original Lamont. It doesn't have a broken four-pillar. The four-pillar on mine is much, much thicker. And the builder, Guy Flockhart, the builder, made it thick on purpose because he looked at the original and said, oh, I don't want it to break. I'll make it like twice as thick. But that means it's really stiff too. But yeah, so I really think that there was a taste for higher tension on these instruments. And it'll be interesting to look to see if other instruments in the early 17th century, if they were cranking up the tension on those as well. I think it was true, at least for some, like possibly some string instruments also had tension increase. So I don't know if this was a general thing in the early 17th century or not, but it may have been.
Would there be a possibility that just whoever was playing didn't know?
Didn't know? Yeah, exactly. It's quite possible.
Because often you can see, you know, when harps come for repair, the strings are
Somebody
all
did
over the
something
place.
crazy with the string. It's quite possible. Yeah, until we find more string fragments. It's a sample of one, so we don't know if they were all done this way. That's a really good point. You know, but we can say at least the Lamont harp. I mean, if that's really what somebody was stringing, the way someone was stringing the Lamont harp, that certainly explains some of the damage to the harp. And so we don't want to entirely blame the builder of that harp, although the neck joint could have been done better. The neck joint had problems already with the sound box, but a lot of damage is because the harp was never, and I don't think the harp was intended to take that kind of tension at all when it was originally built. And that's why it's got a pair of straps across the four-pillar and neck joint. And those were not original. Those were added later. They were definitely not original. They were added much later after the neck, after the four-pillar compressed. I think after the four-pillar broke and was repaired. And you wouldn't do that unless you needed to. And I think it was because there was no tension in those things. Yeah, anyway. Okay, so fun stuff. Okay, so so I did this with the CT scans. You can make them be stereo. I don't know if you can see it coming out of the screen there. Hopefully you can. So that's the Lamont harp again. It's Queen Mary harp. So, you know, why look at a scan when you can look at a scan in TV? But it's actually a useful tool because I've used this to look at some of the joints. This is my favorite one. This is the 4-pillar of the Queen Mary harp. And the reason that the decorative work shows is because it was painted on with vermilion, which contains mercury. And mercury's a metal, it's really dense, and so it showed up really well on the scans. Let's look at that one, anyways, it's really cool. That's my favorite. Love that. That's pretty cool. So it's fun and cool, but okay, I said I have an ulterior motive. Here's my ulterior motive, and it's not to sneak pictures of you guys, I swear. So, some of you will be going on a field trip on Tuesday. How many are planning to go on the field trip? Now, I know in past years, and I don't know if it's going to be the case this year, but in past years, you've been given permission to take photographs of the parks. And I don't know if you're going to be given permission to do this year. That is entirely up to the museum. I have no idea. But there was something that I didn't think of when I was photographing the 2 harps in Scotland until after I'd taken all of my photographs. And that is, why take a photograph when you can take a photograph in stereo? And this is when I got serendipitously. I had a couple of pictures of the cloin, because I went in and I looked at the cloin. I'm not asking you to take measurements, they're not going to let you do that. But I had been in to take some measurements off of the coin. And I had 2 pictures that were separated by just the right amount. So I combined them in Photoshop and made a stereo image. And I said, wow, that's really cool. But other than this, you know, a couple of pictures just done serendipitously, this has never been done for any of these old harps. And it's incredibly easy to do. It does not require any special equipment, just a digital camera. It does not require any special setup, and it does not take any like rules or time or anything like that, or tripods or funny stuff, or asking the museum for special permission or anything like that. All you have to do is take 2 snaps instead of 1. It's really, really easy, and it's very easy to combine them. And this would be a new, never done before thing that you people could, if you want to, and if they give you permission to take photographs, could do. And it's never, as far as I know, there's never been stereo images taken of these harps. And that would be an incredibly useful thing for researchers, because there's so many things that you can't see in a flat photograph. The contours of decorative sculpture, or just the shape and the twists and turns in the shape. And to have that would be a really, in addition to being cool, it would be a really, really useful research tool for somebody who can't get in to see the harps. That would be a wonderful and fantastic thing, never done before, and something that you people could do. And if anybody is interested, here's the Queen Mary. This is again a serendipitous one. Should have shown that first. Those are the woods. So this is the inside of the sound box of the Queen Mary harp, and that's the tool marks. Oh, I was going to talk about the tool marks, but I can talk about it now. The things sticking out are the wooden pegs. Those pegs are from the 19th century, by the way. They're not historical. We checked. We could tell they were made from out of like South American woods, and so they're made out of tropical wood, and they're just like the ones that you would have expected to find in a musical instrument store from the time. So they're not historical. But anyway, yeah. So here are the tool marks. Remember I talked about strength and flexibility. Okay, so the Queen Mary harp, this is not just a matter of somebody, they were in a hurry and they just couldn't be bothered to, scrape this smooth and sand it down. They just left all the tool marks. This was done very, very carefully and purposefully, and it actually took a lot of time. And they're all lined up like furrows. They didn't do the sides, just the front. And what I believe is that, and I'm pretty certain this is the effect, I don't know if this was their intention, but the effect of this is they all act like micro ribs. And these harps don't have any ribbing inside, but they act like, like a bendy straw. You know how bendy straws have a little ribbed part and it allows it to be flexible. And on a much smaller level, this does that, okay? It increases the flexibility of the front of the soundbox. It allows it to bend more this way. So I don't know if that was the intention of the builder, but that's certainly what happens, yeah.
I'm thinking less like a bendy straw and more like corrugated cardboard. So
Oh.
it bends in one direction,
Yes.
not another.
Yes, that's a
And
better
then
analogy,
And then
I
I
like that.
thought, they're not flat, there is an angle, so what's the implication of that?
Oh, that's because the builder, the person who made the soundbox was right-handed.
Yeah, but you see what I mean? It's going to bend at this angle, but not this. So there's going to be implications for how the soundboard vibrates.
Yes, oh, that's true, yeah. That's a good point. It'll make it sort of act maybe asymmetrically. And that was something that I noticed in the contour maps of the soundboard, is that they're thicker on one side, both of them are thicker on the left-hand side. Now I'd like to look at more, that's a sample of 2, so I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but it does have the effect of making the soundboard vibrate asymmetrically, which is a good thing, because if the 2 sides were identical in their thickness, you've got just the string band down the middle, you could end up with cancellation, where one side going up, the other side going down exactly the same amount, and that you could end up with dead spots in the sound. I don't know, again, I'm not sure if that was on purpose. I'd have to look at more soundboards, but that's interesting that both of them are like that.
Karen?
Yeah.
Sorry, do you think that it was just an acoustic thing, the thickness, or was it structural as well?
Oh, do you mean these, or do you mean the?
I mean, the thickness of the sound box, do you think that was to make it stronger, or just for flexibility and?
I think both. Yeah.
Emily, do you have anything to say about the coloration around the holes there?
Yeah, sure. At some point later in the, after, not during the historical period of this art, but later on, possibly in the 19th century, I don't know, or maybe later, somebody went, put a layer of lacquer or something on the outside of the sound box, and it seeped in through the string holes. And the reason that you see it here is, so the string toggles indented the wood around each of the string holes during the working life, when the harp was in use. And so it broke the wood there. It indented it and it damaged the wood there because it pushed it in and broke some of the fibers. So when the stain, whatever it was, like wood stain or whatever, black or whatever they put on the outside of the box, rather sloppily, because you can see where it dripped in. When it seeped in, and then they stained the inside of the box. And then I'm quite certain that was not during the historical period. I think that was later, somebody cleaning up, and let's do the inside as well. Wherever the wood was bruised, it took up more of the stain, and so it ended up darker here. And so that's why they look darker there.
What is the effect of the grooves on the sound?
It's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I don't know.
Does it sustain the notes longer?
I'm sorry?
Are the notes sustained? Is the sound of the strings sustained longer because of the vibration, the extra vibration?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure I understand what you're getting at.
Are the grooves, the
Oh,
grooves
the
increase the vibration
Oh,
on the soundboard?
that's a good question. It would probably increase the amplitude a little bit. It might not damp as quickly. Yeah, it could help the sustain. It could help the volume. It's something we need to think about it some more. Yeah, we need to think about it some more. But I think yes, I think it did affect the sound. Here's another 3D. There's another 3D one of the point. You're going to get to see the point. And again, this is one that I just happened to have 2 photographs that were just offset a little bit, and I was able to combine them. But these aren't really proper 3D images. Now, if anybody wants to do this and wants to meet back here after dinner, I will show you how to take 3D photographs. It's very easy, and I will be here after dinner for anybody who wants to do this for like Tuesday or whatever. Or even do holiday stamps. Do have the holiday stamps in 3D. Bring your digital camera, and I'll show you how it's done. It's easy. And if you got a camera that has a flash card, we can put them on my computer. We can actually combine them. We can take pictures of each other in a hearse. So if you're interested, if anybody's interested, let me know after the talk, and we can get back here after dinner. Anyway, is that it? That's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, yay. Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
What you've said about the soundboard being thicker on the left side for both of these harps, it's something it's kind of obvious already that from the bend, like, and from the cheek bands, like the left, the fact that it would have been strung on the left, like you can see that really clearly. But from the very from the very start of the build, that was the design. You know, from that if it's
That they did that knowing that it was going to need to be stronger. And that's it. Sure, I totally see that. Yeah, I think that's
it's just like another big piece of evidence to suggest it was definitely designed to be strung that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Well, yeah, Simon.
Have you got anything to say at the moment about mismatched components? Thinking about the original shapes of the harps?
Do you want to be more anything in particular?
Well, you showed us the string layers of the harps late in their working life, after they've deformed. You showed us it at the beginning of their working lives. Is that really the beginning, or is that another?
Oh yeah, I don't know. I'm really not. I haven't quite made up my mind about what's going on with the sound box of the Lamont harp. For the longest time, I thought, yeah, there's things have been replaced. I think that's quite possible that the neck is something's not original. But the bottom string hole really wasn't used. I did find one tiny little scratch on the string shoe for the number 32 string hole. So I think at some point, like maybe once, somebody put a string in the hole, but it was literally like once. So I don't know. I don't know what to think, because if the sound box had come from, let's say it was reused from another harp, or the neck was reused from another harp, why wasn't that bottom string hole reused? If it was a replacement, or if the neck was a replacement, either way, why make a replacement? Why build a replacement with the next string hole? So I don't know. If you've got any suggestions, I'm happy to hear them. I haven't quite made up my mind. What I didn't go into today, because this will be a whole separate talk, is the sort of the life story of the Lamont harp. And we're at the point where we can actually really put together a Lamont harp. This is your life. Maybe that can be next week. And it's incredibly interesting. Last year I mentioned that there's a date inscribed inside the sound box of the Lamont harp that we discovered, and that was incredibly exciting. It's actually tapped in with a flat end of the chisel, and while we haven't carbon dated the wood yet, and I'm still considering carbon dating the wood or radio dating the wood, there's issues with that. So we don't have an analytical number that says this is the age of the wood. We haven't done dendrochronology yet. But the circumstantial evidence is growing that that date is actually genuine, that it wasn't somebody like in the 19th century. Let's put AD 1451. It says AD 1451 inside the sound box of the Lamont. That's really exciting. And there's growing evidence that that's actually
What is it again?
1451. 1451. There's really strong evidence now that that's actually genuine, that it actually is, that inscription was put in 1451, and that's actually how old the harp is.
Or how the sound box is at least.
Yeah, or at least the sound boxes. So the Lama harp is complicated because it's quite possible with the Lama harp that pieces were replaced. And I think the cheek bands are not original. In fact, I'm leaning fairly strongly to the cheek bands as part of replacement. That's probably going to have to be a whole different talk at another time. But the Lama harp is incredibly interesting.
What's any idea of what the Queen Mary would be from? Would that actually be later, do you think, or?
I'm still up in the air about the Queen Mary harp. The four pillar of the Queen Mary harp, the decorative work of the four pillar is definitely consistent with the late 15th century Iona school, so West Highland, which is what people would say. And you can see where it's like, oh, well, we need to carbon date, we need something. There's all this circumstantial evidence, but we can't say for sure unless we have some kind of dendrochronology of carbon dating. And I've been pursuing this. Last year I talked about the issues with carbon dating. So you need a big sample for this wood. You need a plug about twice the size of the eraser on the end of a pencil, about that big. It's pretty big, so and you would have to take it from the interior, so you have to drill it. And the museum is not going to want to do it. And in addition to that, because of the particular time period that we are interested in for these harps, and we expect them to fall within, is the uncertainty is really large for radiocarbon dating in that time period. We're not looking at a 5,000-year-old fossil or something. This is really quite recent. And so the answer that you get might only tell you, well, the tree was cut down sometime between the 15th century and the 18th century. We already kind of know that. So you wouldn't get a really good answer. Dendrochronology, maybe you might get a little bit better. But there are more sophisticated methods now becoming available, and I've been in talks with the people to do that, and that's radio dating, not just using carbon, using other isotopes of other elements, and you can get a much more precise answer with a slightly smaller sample. And also, if you take a sample, it just tells you when the tree was cut down. It doesn't tell you when it was turned into a harp. Okay, so you have to bear that in mind. Some people use old wood, so you don't know. And also, but this method that I've been looking into is you can take samples. Normally you would take just a sample and it would give you the date of that tree ring. But if you take samples in different tree rings, you can actually sort of triangulate the date and get a much narrower window of uncertainty. And there's a lab that does this in Scotland, and they use They use much smaller samples. They do micro sampling. I think it's 20 milligrams is the size that they need of prepared sample. So I've been in talks with them, and I need to run this by the museum and see if let this happen. So ultimately we want to get an independent analytical dating, because otherwise it's just a lot of circumstantial evidence and we'll never really know for sure. But yeah, the date is looking, like I said again, it says 1451 inside the sound box. It's almost like too good to be true. That's when you think, this is too good to be true. Keith Sanger and I together have looked at some circumstantial evidence. Keith has gone into the National Archives of Scotland and he's pulled out 2 documents that bracket that date. One thing was I don't have a picture of it here, but are the numerals style for somebody writing in the 15th century. They're too modern, you know. And Keith pulled out 2 charters that bracket that date that are Scottish, and the style of numerals matches. You know. But again, that style could have been used in much later as well. So it's not unique to that time period. However, the 2 documents that he pulled out, he had them out for a reason, and they relate to the Lude estate, to the people who eventually had these harps, eventually had the Lamont harp. And it turns out in 1448, there was a crown charter was drawn up to create the Lude estate, and it was given to one of the forebears. Oh, you get to watch the fish. Okay, we'll watch the fish. It was given to one of the forebears of the family that ended up with this harp. And in 1452, it was turned into a barony, and it excluded. It's interesting because there was this estate, but there was this nearby land that was sort of adjacent to it, and it excluded that land, and that land was Cluny. And John Donaldson, who's the forebear of the Robertsons, he had 2 sons. The eldest son got Lude, and it looks like the younger of the 2 sons got Cluny. And it's the Cluny branch that actually ended up with the harps down, you know, a few generations down the road. And Charles, the younger son, let's see, I don't have my notes, so I might get the generations wrong, but I think it was the younger son, Charles, who was Charles of Cluny. He is the guy who married Lilias Lamont. And her dates are interesting because her brother, who became, you know, the Laird of Lamont back out in Argyll, when his father died, he was just a boy. So he was a ward of the crown because he was not an adult yet. And he reached the age of adulthood in the year 1451. And Keith has theorized that he became the Laird of Lamont in 1451, the date that's inscribed in the harp. And Keith has theorized that he probably, as soon as he became an adult, he probably wanted to marry off his sister. And it's quite possible that she would have been married off shortly thereafter. Now, according to the Gunn's treaties, I think it says 1460, and Burke's Gentry says 1464 for the marriage, the Lamont marriage. So it's sort of in the right time period, but it's not the same date, so I don't know. The harp could have been made, and then maybe she got married later, or came with her, and it was not brand new when it came with her. Maybe it was made, at that time. It's the position of the date is interesting because it's hidden. It's not out there for public view. It's not a monument. It's hidden. The only person who would see that date is the builder or somebody opening up the sound boxes. You can't even see it through the sound holes because it's on the inside of the front face. So it was for private viewing. So I don't think it was put there as a commemorative of like a marriage or something like that. But it could have been put there by the builder as, this is when I made this. It's right above the piece. There's a piece of vellum. There's a vellum document that's glued in there, and it's right above that. And it's not it wasn't put in there at the time the vellum document was put in. I'm pretty certain because the glue that was used to put the vellum document in is smeared over the board in places. So I don't think it dates to the same time.
Do you think the vellum was glued over more inscription?
I think it might be. I think there might, who knows? There might be a muffetchin underneath there, so and so. I don't know, but it could be, yeah. And it's interesting that something that Keith pointed out with the date is, he was the one who pointed out that was tapped in. It wasn't scratched in like this. It was tapped in with a chisel, and you can see when you look at it. It was tapped in with a chisel. And if, with the harp all together in one piece with the 4-pillar and the neck on it, and if you take the back cover off, you can only lie it down on its side. You can't put it face down because it's got the neck and forepillar. It lies on its side on the table. So if the harp was all in one piece, like say later on in its life, and you're going to chisel something on it, you wouldn't put it on the front like that because it would keep moving. You would put it on the side. It's not on the side, it's on the front. And as Keith pointed out to me, that was probably done when the sound box did not have a neck and a forepillar attached to it. And so it could be laid flat down on the table or a workbench. Because it was done from above. It was done from above. It was lying face down. It didn't have anything attached to it. It was just a sound box with nothing on it. Now it could have been, in the early 17th century, that harp was massively, massively refurbished. The life of this harp, it looks like, right, it was made around 1451, and then it comes across Scotland from Argyll to Perthshire at around that time, and has a nice time there, and then it's broke and needs refurbishment at about that was about the time that the Louvre estate got back to Sylvia Diane. I don't want to go into too much detail with that. That's like I said, another talk. But yeah, it could have the harp could have been apart when they fixed the harp in the early 17th century, which it looks like it was refurbished then. So that could have been a time that it was in pieces. So I don't know, but the evidence is leaning towards that really being done in the 15th century.
Karen,
Yes.
could I just ask one last question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just think it's what you've pointed out about the thickness of the soundboard there. It's really interesting. And if you watched any of the tutors who were playing last night, they're all sitting to the side on to the audience. They're not like we all know this, but so the sound needs to project. If you didn't have amplification at that time, you need the sound to project from a certain angle to like the front of the harp.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, so that's one thing, the effect of that thickness. It may vibrate more on one side, so it can project. So if you're sitting like
yes,
this,
because it's asymmetrical. The side that faces the audience speaks more loudly.
yeah,
So
and you've
thinner
also
side that faces the audience.
It would be the thinner side that faces the audience.
exactly, and
Good
it's
point.
also the
I
thicker
like that.
side is on the left hand,
Yeah.
where you're going to have the left hand
This-
pushing into the sound box. So as you're saying, it's a structural fit. Like it's got the tension of the strings, but you also got like
There's
if you,
also an acoustical.
Andrew would say that there was a lot of pressure, like on from the heel of the hand. So you're kind of there's a few things matching up. Just the last thing I'm wondering is the ribbing and the direction. Like is it really like are you 100% that it was a right-handed person and the direction was because of a right-handed or
Or
was
do you
it?
think it was intentional that
Yeah,
they
I'm
did it
just-
at an angle?
exactly.
Simon was kind of saying.
Just wondering.
That could be that they did that. It was intentional that they
Well, actually, it's the grain because
Or the
if you
grain?
do it any
Go
other
ahead.
way, it's kind of the way you go work with the grain. That's the most convenient way because otherwise it drips the grain.
Oh, okay, so is it because?
Because it's possible to move the sound box and do it from a different direction. I mean, like
Okay,
it's not you
yeah.
don't necessarily because
Alright.
when you work with the sound box, you do it sits like that, then you turn it, you work with the grain, so you turn it the other way,
Okay.
and again try to work with the grain.
It could have been some of all of this.
Yeah, but for me, the idea of the performer sitting there inside isn't something we think because we're going to concerts when we sit in rows and the person is sitting in front of us. But wouldn't the harper be, for instance, in the middle of the hall when everybody could see him? Or,
Go ahead.
Do you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, well,
you
no,
were saying to me.
Oh yeah, I was trying to
you said
remember when I
me.
said to you. It sounded so lucid when I was telling you.
About the harp on your display, so.
Yeah. So these harps. Okay. Let me see if I can.
The second picture would be good.
Yeah, the second one is a good one. Yeah. So there's. There we go. There's two sides to the harp, and traditionally, and we know from the wear marks on the instruments and also from historical information that the harp was leaned against the left side of the body, and the left hand played the treble, and the right hand played the bass. And if you are the performer, if you're the harper, and your audience historically would have been very important people. You would have been of a lower status than your audience. We're used to today, when we go to concerts, they're up on the stage, they're illuminated, we're in the dark. The conductor we look at the conductor's back. The conductor faces the orchestra. That's a modern thing, where the musicians and the conductor are of a higher status than the audience. Whereas historically it was reversed. The musicians were servants, and the audience was, the king or the lord or whatever. Musicians were of a lower status than their audience, and it was important to be respectful of that. If you're playing, you want your instrument to present well, and you want your body to present well to your audience. Let's say, and the most important person in your audience, which is the king or whomever, the king or the lord or the chieftain. That's the most important. You might have other people around you, but that's the VIP. So you position yourself for the VIP. And the harp does not really present well if you're face on. It presents better to one side.
Well, that's why you don't
Yeah,
go
that's
straight, it's more
exactly.
visual than anything.
Yeah, exactly. It presents better visually from one side. Now, one side of the harp is more decorated than the other side on these instruments. Okay, the tuning pins on the old harps are very decorative. They're not plain. They've got incised decoration on them. They're very pretty. And the other side is the side that the strings come on, and that's the less nice side. And so you want the pretty side is the side that you want to face your VIP audience member. And if you've got the harp on the left side of your body, also more of your body is facing outward as you're playing. If you were to face the other side of the harp, they're not seeing you well. They're not seeing the instrument as well either. So it makes sense to have the right hand side of your body facing, if you're playing with the left hand and the treble and the right hand face. Also, you don't want to show the off side of the instrument to your VIP audience member. It's like, imagine if there was a concert with a harpsichord. And you know how harpsichords have these beautiful paintings on the inside of the cover. They're lovely. And also, something that a lot of people don't know about harpsichords is, there's all the beautiful paintings, but the side of the harpsichord that faces the wall, the harpsichord has a spine with the straight side, and that's the side that's pushed up against the wall usually, unless it's a very fancy instrument. That's just rough. It's not decorated at all. It's like somebody took a saw. It's not even sanded. It's just rough. It's just a piece of rough sawn wood, literally, because nobody can see it. Now, what if there was a concert and, like at the university, say, the chancellor was there, and the principal was there, and the chancellor is the Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. So the Princess Royal shows up, and the person who's in charge of putting the harpsichord up on the stage is having an off day, and they put the harpsichord up facing the wrong way. So the beautiful painting is facing the back wall, and the audience sees this rough side that's not even painted in it. I mean, everybody would be aghast. You'll be in all the papers, and oh my God, you'll be huge embarrassment. You'll be showing up with your underpants on the outside of your trousers or something. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it, and you wouldn't have done it historically. You wouldn't want the side of the harp that has the strings that come off of the ends of the tuning pins. That's the off side. That's the less decorated side. On the Lamont harp, the cheek band just has rough decoration on it. It's really sort of scratchy and wobbly. On the right side, cheek band is really nicely, carefully done. On the Queen Mary harp, although it used to have decorative badges that were added to it, they've been pulled off, they've been ripped off, but they were all on the right-hand side. None on the left-hand side. The side that would face the audience if you're playing the harp or face the important member of the audience. If you've got the harp on your left shoulder and you're playing treble with your left hand and bass with your right hand, that's the side that's going to face your VIP member. That's the side of the harp that's the nicest side, that's the money side.
So that's what I was gonna say, that's the side of the harp that's thin.
That's the side that's thin, yeah, that's right. That's the side of the sound box that's thinner, just like you said, yeah. Yeah, so something to think, not that I'm trying to tell people how to play, I know some people play the other way around, so I'm not knocking you. But just thinking historically, back in the day, yeah, you wouldn't have wanted that side to face your audience, so they wouldn't have wanted to play with right hand in the treble, left hand in the bass, because they'd be showing the back of the harp to the VIP person in the audience, and that would be like showing the back of the harpsichord.
Well, except that you could easily put in the pins the other way.
You can't though,
straight
because
away.
the holes are tapered.
Yeah, but no, but you build.
You would have to build it from
You
scratch.
build it that
You
way.
have to build it from scratch.
And so the reason why that side is for tuning with the right hand, I think.
Yeah, so you have to build it mirror reverse.
Yeah.
Can we carry on informally for the rest of the evening?
Yeah, sorry to keep you up. Anyway, let me know if anybody wants to find out about how to do 3D stereo photography.
I think everyone might want.
Okay.
Okay, so can we thank Karen one more time and then